Welcome. Thanks for coming.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
You're setting a record, really. You're the elected official who's been here the most. This is your third visit, so we appreciate it, and we don't invite people back if they're bad. So.
Well, let's see if I can get invited again.
So you're good. You know, it's maybe a dubious honor. The only person who's been here more than you is not an elected official. That'd be Harvey Kronberg.
Well, that's pretty good, though. That's not bad company to be in.
It's very good. Harvey's a good friend, and he's been real supportive. So I wanted to start, as we said, by just asking you a little bit about why you got into politics to begin with before we get to the contemporary period. You've become a fixture, and that's not a polite way of saying you're old. You know, you've done a lot. You're very well known. You've drawn folks here. What got you started, and how'd you start?
You know, I have always been interested in public policy and politics, and kind of swirled around it in different ways. I had served as chair of the Democratic Party here locally. When Governor Richards, I was very involved in her campaign, and when she was elected governor, she appointed me chair of one of the state agencies. It was then known as the Texas Air Control Board, which was the state agency responsible for air quality in the state, and it was during that period of time that I was chair of that agency, we merged it with the Water Commission to form what is now known as the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. I'd been involved in some other public service type of things. I'd been president of the Texas Young Lawyers Association, which kind of scratched my itch for being involved. That's the public service arm of the State Bar of Texas, and I did that. But I'd never really run for office until I ran for mayor of Austin, and I announced for mayor in October of '96. And I credit, like I say, I'd always been interested, but I credit the freedom to really get involved in public service with getting sick. And I was diagnosed at a pretty young, in my early 30s, at a time when I thought I had the world by the tail. Things were great. I was practicing law, and Liz and I had a small child, and then I was diagnosed with testicular cancer. And I had 3 surgeries and chemo. Went back to work when it looked like I was going to live through that, and a couple of years later on a routine CAT scan, they found another tumor in my abdomen, and so they went in and field dressed me. And I came out of that and said, you know, and Liz and I talked about it, and we said, we're going to do something different. And we set a date, a January date, and had no idea what that was. So what we did is we looked at a variety of things. It might have been just working half-time or figuring out something. And during '96, that surgery was in April of '95, and during that period of time, people started coming to me and saying, you know, you've always loved public policy and politics, and the mayor's not going to run for re-election. Why don't you run for mayor? And so we talked about it and decided, you know, if I hate it, it's a 3-year term, I'll go find something else to do. But I was looking for something different, and I didn't hate it. I loved it. I loved being involved in public service. And so I really credit that as one of the big reasons I ended up. Now, what that means, by the way, is that I'm the only guy in America that thinks being mayor of Austin is better than chemotherapy. But I loved it. And so I'm really pleased that I am able to every day get up and be alive in a way where I get to have an impact on people's lives. And for at least this period of my life, this is what Liz and I and our family has committed to, and we'll keep at it.
And so when you decided to run for Senate, how did that unfold?
Well, as you know, which I try to keep a secret, but I'll have to admit it, I resigned the mayor's office so that I could run for Attorney General. And you'll notice you're not calling me General today. So in 2002, I ran statewide and was not successful. So I went back into private law practice and did some other things. I stayed involved in public service, served as chair of the Greater Austin Chamber of Commerce during that period of time, and always thought I might like to get back into elective office if the opportunity arose. And it arose when the longtime senator for Travis County, in this Senate District 14, Senator Gonzalo Barrientos, decided to retire. And the rumor had been that he might retire, and so I'd kind of told folks that if he does, kind of count on me to run. And so the day he said he wasn't going to run again, I quietly sent out a one-sentence deal that says I'm in. And the good news is that that year I had no Republican and no Democratic opposition, and that was an election I could win. So I got elected and then was reelected, and now with redistricting, we're all up. Even though I was reelected just in 2010, we're all up in 2012, and I've told people I'm going to run again, so I'll be up in 2012.
So you learned something from that race, run unopposed.
Yeah, let me tell you, I won big.
So, you know, my recollection when you started is that from the outside, it didn't seem like the transition to the Senate was all that tough to use. It felt to me like you really took to it.
I loved it. You know, I've been around the Capitol a lot. Liz and I moved to Austin in 1981, and like I say, I've been involved in some political activity, including some stuff that took me up to the Capitol. A lot of pro bono stuff up at the Capitol, working on different issues that were important to me, a lot of them health-related, things like diabetes and things of that nature. And then when I was president of the Young Lawyers, I was on the executive committee of the State Bar, and I was the only member of the executive committee of the State Bar that lived in Austin, and the bar was undergoing sunset review that legislative session, so I was up there all the time for that, and a variety of other things. So I had some understanding, I think, of the legislature and the Senate, and a lot of friends in the Senate. You know, while I'd served as mayor, I was representing the city of Austin quite frequently. That was back during a period of time when Austin was always a favorite target at the legislature. In fact, those that are too young to remember it, we used to have a term for it called Austin bashing. We even would have a big party just as the legislative session would come on and invite all the members of the legislature, and we called it the Austin Bash. So I spent a lot of time as mayor trying to build bridges with the city of Austin, the capital city, and the members of the legislature. So it felt very good to go into the Senate and be involved, and I felt like it was a pretty good transition.
It's funny you use that in Austin bashing in the past tense.
Well, I think we've changed that
Things
quite a bit.
better?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you always have an issue or two. In this last session, we had a couple of things that popped up that didn't end up becoming legislation. But it's nowhere near like it was back in the 90s, where the legislature, and I've kind of got an approach to that, and I tell people this when they come to me and they're upset about something in the city of Austin, and so they say, we want you to carry legislation that will do this. I say, look, the legislature shouldn't be an appellate court for something you don't like at the Austin City Council. We elect an Austin City Council to do those things. There's a democracy situation involved here. If you don't like it, you need to be involved in that election. And that was my position as mayor, and I carry that today as a senator. And I think it's different. I think we've had some real success in that regard.
Let's talk about the big initiative you've been involved with.
What would that be?
I know you probably haven't been doing much on this lately.
Yeah, right.
Talk about your initiative and the work you've done on the medical school and the medical research center here in the area.
Well, I'm real glad to get to talk about that. I tease about it, but it's in my opinion, being able to put together and have in Austin, Texas, affiliated with the University of Texas at Austin, a medical school, a teaching hospital, a modern state-of-the-art teaching hospital, and what I would consider to be uniquely Austin healthcare clinics in our community. And so we really do have a health science center that involves research and scientific discovery and all those things. We can talk more in detail if you'd like. But I think it's one of the biggest things that can happen to Austin and Central Texas, and I really mean maybe since the decision to put the University of Texas at Austin in Austin, Texas. And we've talked about it a long time. Like I said, Liz and I got here in 1981, and really since that time, there's always been some discussion about why is there no medical school in Austin? We need to have a medical school and what it would mean. Now, I've got some theories about why it's been a little slow coming along, but there has been, over the past several years, extraordinary work that's been done at the University of Texas, with Seton and UT Southwestern, with the healthcare district for Travis County, and in a variety of other things. I don't mean to slight anybody or anything, but you've had a lot of extraordinary work that's kind of led us to a point where, in my view, we are ready to say now is the time. I think that it's required some political will that has not really been there. I think it's required, it's going to require us to navigate a very complex path that really the plan hadn't been put together up until now, and we're really starting on that. And I think there has been almost a part of the political will failure has been a fear of failure. Who's going to really step out there and say, now's the time to do it, and here's the process for trying to bring it about, for fear, ooh, it won't work. So back on September 20th, I said, here are 10 things that I think this city needs to do in 10 years. And boy, the response has been extraordinary. It's been very positive, really like nothing I've been involved in since I've been involved in public life.
Why do you think the timing is right? Talk a little bit more about that, and then you can lay out the components a little bit more. Because it does seem like a lot of things have matured, and you picked a really good time for it.
Yeah, well, let me go real broad, and then I'll try to get narrower. Look, Austin is, in my opinion, in another transition. And I said this before. The city of Austin, as I read its history or write its history, however you want to phrase that, has gone through several transitions. The first is the first transition is what I would call settlement. When the place was decided that this was going to be a city, and Edwin Waller kind of took the lead on laying out the city of Austin, and it was interesting because when that was done, it's basically what we now know as our downtown. The southern border was the Colorado River, the eastern border was Waller Creek, the western border was Shoal Creek, and the northern border was a hill they called Capitol Hill. And interestingly enough, some people tell me that they named the hill just north of that and called it College Hill. And of course, we know what that became. That transition lasted until, I would say, the way I kind of characterize it, until the dams were finally built on the rivers. And that was kind of a stability point in time, where not only they stabilized the river, but they stabilized the economy. And it really was an economy that was based upon a growing university and state government. Then the next transition happened about 35 years ago. And that was what I would refer to as the SMART time. And that is when Austin went from being a college town that state government dominated its stable economy into a focal point in a worldwide information and knowledge economy. And I can get into all detail on that, but that transition, we've been in that transition, and I think now we're moving into, if we do this right, into the next transition, which is kind of a point in time where we build upon our knowledge economy at the very same time we enhance quality of life through better health care. Now, that's a long way of getting to the point that part of the reason I think now's the time is because in a lot of ways we're maturing to the point that now's the time. We really weren't a business community that could compete with other communities when it came to wanting to create jobs and healthcare through a healthcare industry. Frankly, a lot of folks I've talked to will tell you that's one of the reasons that back in the late 50s, early 60s, San Antonio got the medical school instead of Austin. In addition to that, there's been so much investment go into research and healthcare type activities over the last decade. Things like what you have seen just recently. There was an announcement that Seton and UT Southwestern, their research institute that they have created together, that is, they just hired their first executive director. And he's a guy from the National Institutes of Health. He is a superstar. So there's been we have a number of residency programs, 11 residency programs in Austin right now. We are right at 300 third and fourth year students and residents in the community. So a lot of investments going into. So I think we're at that point where not only have we transitioned as a community, but the immediate investment we've seen in healthcare makes it now the time to take that next big step.
Have you seen, are there other models for this? I'm intrigued by the mixture of government, enterprise, but also the community-based element of this seems to me to be pretty innovative.
Well, there's not as much as you might expect, and I think we're in essence we're writing a new playbook. The old playbook and the way people like to think of things is they say we need to have a medical school. State, give us a medical school, and they'll plop down a medical school, and then the next city will say we need a medical school. Well, there's your medical school. Well, with all that's gone on, everything from state budgeting to different approaches to things, I don't think that's the future. I think the future, frankly, of higher education and medical, generally, and medical schools specifically, is going to be that it's going to require a partnership, a coalition, if you will, a public-private partnership that includes not only a great Tier 1 research university, but also the system itself. It will also include the business community. It will include, and by business community, I think you talk more specifically about those who provide health care in the business community. And in Austin, that's like Seton and St. David's. Those are our two big pillars. It's going to require the community through things like the Central Health, which is our Travis County Healthcare District. And then it's going to require philanthropy. Otherwise, you can't get it all done. You can't fund it all. So it's going to require really a community effort. And I've been very gratified with the reaction from the community.
It all sounds great. Let's talk a little bit about some of the obstacles, just to be fair.
Sure.
I mean, there are a lot of things. There
are none. I gave a speech, right? Doesn't that cover it?
There are a lot of things that do seem very propitious. The maturation of the city, the industrial base, the mood in a way. There's some almost intangibles. But we're also living in a time of scarcity and economic uncertainty. At the state level, obviously, this was the last session, as much as any session we've seen, perhaps, at least in a while. There was not a lot of appetite for new programs, for spending money, and even beyond that, I saw another talk this morning, and I was struck by the sense that the lack of revenue is accepted as a state of nature rather than a political choice at this point. How do we go in that environment?
Well, first of all, that's why I think there's one aspect to that that is part of the last answer I gave. We have to develop a new playbook, and that's what I'm trying to lead on, is the creation of a new playbook where we are as a community coming together with a variety of tools and assets and putting it together in an effort to achieve certain goals, because we are in a different time. But here's the other thing. I really believe that an investment in something like a medical school, particularly in a place like Austin, Texas, that has so many assets. First of all, I would argue that the investment ought to be made, if for no other reason, because of past investment. This community has made such a significant past investment, it would be wrong not to take it to the next step where you can completely fulfill that initial investment. But the other part about it is this. There really, in my view, is no state economy. Now, we talk about, we look at numbers as the state, and we talk about Texas as a whole, and we take a lot of pride in that from time to time. But really, the state economy is the sum of its regional component parts. And we are going to need to advocate strongly for making the investment that will strengthen some of our regions. You know, some of the conservative estimates I've seen, that if we do things like have a medical school in Austin, Texas, and some of the other aspects to it, what you could do is you would create 15,000 permanent jobs, have about $3 billion in economic activity, and that benefits the entire state. we are going to have to recognize that even in a time of wanting to be smart and maybe scarce resources, we have to make investment in the long term. We have to make investment in certain types of infrastructure if we want to have jobs. We're going to have to make investment in certain type of infrastructure if we're going to want to have quality health care. We have to make these investments or our economy will ultimately suffer. I got to tell you, I look at this room and we got some young folks in this room, and I'm worried for them. Because what I'm worried about is that if we're not careful, we're going to create the first generation of Texans that don't inherit any excess infrastructure as they try to build their economy. I mean, let's face it, somebody my age, I got here in '81, when Liz and I got here, there was excess road capacity. There was excess, we had lots of doctors. We're behind on doctors in this state. We're behind on doctors here locally. There were enough nurses. Well, we're behind on that in Texas and here locally. There was enough water. Well, today we know this drought has brought home the problems with that, and we've not funded the state water plan. So my point being that those of us that are our age, my age, you may not want to be included in that, my age, we inherited excess capacity so that we could build a strong economy. Our parents and our grandparents made that investment. I'm real worried that these folks are not going to inherit the excess capacity, and now they're going to have to compete on a global basis with jurisdictions that are willing to make that investment. So, in direct response to your question, I think now more than ever, when we are seeing some of the problems we have in terms of jobs and job creation, this is the time to make the investment that will benefit us over the long haul economically.
I want to come back to how we have that conversation, but we still have time. I want to talk about another subject, though, that I think is closely related, and that is you talked about the centrality of research, a Tier 1 university, biomedical research. You're also on the, and I can never remember exactly what the committee is called.
I'm not sure I could either.
But the joint, Reeve Hamilton can just reel it off. It's very impressive. But well, the joint oversight.
That makes one.
Right.
Yeah.
The Joint Higher Education Oversight Committee,
right.
I think, is what those of us that are a little simpler are calling it. What's your understanding of the charge, and tell us a little about how that's going?
Yeah, well, that arose in large part, if not entirely, as a result of a whole lot of controversy that came up. And I really would say it was at its height and its most heated at the beginning of this year, back at the early part of the legislative session, where there was some changes in regents in the University of Texas system, although this also applies to other schools, but that was really one of the pivot points that created a lot of the controversy. And what many perceived and believed was a push to change the way our Tier 1 research universities operate in such a way that it would do damage to the concept of how those research universities act and the role of research to some degree. There was a lot of fight during the legislative session and a lot of discussion. I also serve on the Higher Education Committee, and I was quite involved in those discussions and the debate that went on. Subsequent to that, the Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker of the House, and again, I think in large part, if not entirely as a result of the controversy, created this Oversight Committee. It's a joint committee of the Senate and the House. It is chaired by two co-chairs. The chair of the Higher Education Committee in the Senate, which is Senator Judith Zaffarani of Laredo, and State Representative Dan Branch from Dallas, who chairs the House Committee on Higher Education. And so it's a joint committee. I'm really pleased and honored to get to be on there, particularly because of the fact that I represent the University of Texas at Austin in my Senate district. The purpose is to look at governance. It's to ask the hard questions about how we go about appointing regents and the role that regents ought to play in the day-to-day operations and management of our schools. It's about transparency and how it is that we make sure that what's going on in these schools is open and transparent, and by that, for that matter, what happens at the governing body level of the systems is open and transparent. As you might guess, there's a variety of other things that get brought up. But I think it's going quite well. We've had now 2 meetings. In those 2 meetings, the first meeting we heard from a number of experts from around the state, around the country, experts in the concept of governance and how you operate in university settings. This last time, which was just a couple of weeks ago now, we heard from a variety of chairs of different boards of regents. While we're at the University of Texas at Austin and we think of UT and UT system there, we have a number of systems in the state, and their chairs of their boards, and in some instances their chancellors have had an opportunity to speak. At that board meeting, by the way, the chair of the Board of Regents of the A&M system and the chair of the Board of Regents of the UT system both testified and were asked questions by the panel. This next time, the chancellors, Chancellor Figueroa from the University of Texas system and Chancellor Sharp from the A&M system will be part of the invited testimony. So it's been, I think we're making real progress, and we're learning a lot about the system and learning a lot about what we might do to make sure that governance is appropriate and that there's the kind of transparency that we want to see.
Not to be overly blunt, but do you think that this has tamped down the underlying politics that were coloring this for a while?
Well, I don't know if that's overly blunt. I mean, I think that's a legitimate question, and I don't know that tamp down is the right way. I would say that what it's done is it's brought it all out in the open. I'm not sure tamp down seems like people are just kind of waiting to see if this all goes away, and it's not going to go away. What happened was, I think the controversy that was created has created its own transparency, and so now decisions are being made where people are watching, and if there is fear that it's just being tamped down and it'll rear its head when nobody's looking, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think people are going to pay more attention. So I would argue that it's one of the benefits has already occurred, and that is there's more attention being paid to how the university systems operate, and I think that will work to the benefit over the long haul, regardless of what recommendations come out of this, specific recommendations come out of this committee.
It seems to me that a more open conversation about all of this would help not only the immediate matters, but also doing more with connecting higher education to other areas like the medical initiative.
I don't think there's any question that's true. And while the controversy was heated, it was significant, and it should never be diminished. I think the fact that it occurred, of course, I tend to always find the glass half full most of the time. I think one of the things that even though it was nasty and negative and created some problems, I think it actually, one of the positive outcomes of that is there's just going to be more attention paid.
Did you see Speaker Strauss's comments yesterday?
I did.
You have any response to that? I think some people were surprised. Other people were happy to see him make a statement about it.
Well, I guess it'd be hard to say I was surprised, since he was involved in the creation of this Oversight Committee. I think that was maybe a more, that was one reflection of how he obviously felt and what he said yesterday. And for those that don't know, is he was quoted in I think a Star Telegram interview, a Fort Worth Star Telegram interview, where he said that higher education was under attack or assault. I can't remember what word he used. And I think that's part of the reason you saw him use his leadership position to create this Oversight Committee.
That does sort of bring us to politics for the last couple of minutes, and I won't make you talk too much about politics, although I suspect you don't mind that much.
I don't know anything about it, but I'd be happy to try to.
Just in a general sense, obviously the big story in the country right now is Governor Perry making a bid for the presidency.
I thought it was my announcement I'm running for re-election.
I'm not going to ask. Well, I think after that.
The second story, right? Okay.
That'll be the headline maker, of course, in this little session. Rather than just ask you, an obvious question about what you think, but do you think his candidacy is having an effect on what's happening on the ground here in Texas while he's doing this, either in the run-up or now?
Well, sure. I think in a couple of ways. Although I must admit I hadn't thought about that in this level of detail, but I'd say that there's two ways. One is he's not around, and the lieutenant governor, who is the governor in his absence, is running for office, running for a different office. He's running for the United States Senator. So what that boils down to is there's a feeling, I think, you can feel it at the Capitol, that they're not there. Now, I don't know that that's resulted in anything either positive or negative, but there is that sense that there's not push on different things, and my guess is that you don't see as many pronouncements from the governor's office about things that might be occurring in Texas as you would normally see, because they don't want to create any controversy here. Near as I can tell, there's enough going on for them in other places. So they don't want to create the controversy here. So it's pretty quiet. Now, that's the day-to-day kind of sense of things. But I also think you probably see it in what happens on the ground, in the sense of, there's a whole lot going on in this state right now. And everything from wildfires to how you deal with lawsuits that have been filed related to education, to what you do in terms of redistricting and the lawsuits going on there, and the fact that the margins tax, that lawsuit's ongoing. There's a whole lot going on. And when people are elsewhere, and this isn't a criticism so much, it's just that when you're in Iowa or New Hampshire or South Carolina, you can't be as involved in things that are happening right here at home.
You think it's fair to say that the governor and his staff were pretty involved when they are here, say during the session?
Well, it depends on how you define that. The governor was more involved, the governor and the governor's staff, I think, was more involved this last session than I had seen them in previous sessions. My impression of the way the governor deals as a general rule with the legislature is you see a lot of activity at the very beginning when the State of the State speech is given, and then you see a lot of activity at the very end when the veto pen comes out. This last session, I'm kind of complimentary of the way he was involved and the staff was involved, because we had better input from his staff, at least my impression was, better input from his staff about where they might have problems that would result in something being vetoed. And because of the budget nature, and I don't know that he was planning on running for president, but because of the nature of the budget and some of the very hard lines that he drew about how you could deal with the budget, which I think had a negative impact on this budget, he was more involved than I'd seen him in past. Now, the part I was complimentary about, let me be clear, is on the veto stuff and knowing what you might get, you might work yourself silly trying to pass a bill and then it gets vetoed for some reason you didn't even know about. His office was much better on that. I'm not very complimentary about how they handled the budget. In fact, I could be a little negative if you want.
I could talk about this for a long time with you. It's politics being my vice as opposed to policy being a virtue, I guess. But I want to ask you one last question before we open it up. You made reference earlier on to your run for Attorney General almost 10 years ago, or 10 years ago effectively, I guess, really, right?
Yeah, I announced, it's interesting, I left office in November of '01, so we're...
Right.
Wow, I hadn't thought about that till just now.
I thought about just...
I'm
just
a very old man.
And then there was a little boomlet in the last cycle where your name came up a couple times about running statewide again. Think you'll do it ever?
Oh, I don't know. Go back to my original answer. I'm real happy being able to serve. And I mean, part of the reason I'm as passionate as I am about a medical school and all that is because I really think survival gave me opportunities. And as you know, I will see. You know, I'm one of those guys that is not going to say that if opportunity pops up, I won't evaluate it. But I'm also not one of those guys that worries too much about it. One of my rules of life, in fact, I think the last time I was here, I laid out 10 rules of life. One of my rules of life is have a short-term focus with a long-term vision. and that comes directly out of being supposed to be being dead. And that is, my short-term focus is focus on what I got right now. And don't get too worked up about the long term, because I have learned the hard way that, I mean, back when I was first diagnosed, the day before I was diagnosed, if you'd asked me, where are you going to be in 10 years? If I was honest with you, I'd have told you probably within a week. You know, I really thought I had it all planned out. You know, and I learned that one little pain can turn into something that the long-term vision may not be there. So focus right now, have a short-term focus, but do things in a way where if opportunity presents itself and you decide you want to take that opportunity, it's available to you. So I'm not going to get, you know, best laid plans can go away real quick, and I'm having a blast right now. I'm glad that I'm in a situation where I get to serve a community that I love so much and get to be involved in things like this medical school initiative. So we'll see.
That sounds like a pretty big door opening, but I understand.
Oh, yeah, well, that would, you would say that.
All right, let's take some questions. So Mike's got the microphone, or AJ's got the microphone, so if you have questions, please raise your hand and follow up with Senator Watson.
Well, this is an easy crowd. Yeah, there you go, right back there.
Hi, Senator Watson.
Hello.
This is Emily Cicchini, and I loved the time when you were mayor here.
Thank
it was
you.
just great, and you did so much for the arts and to put the arts forward and center in Austin, and I just, you know, always appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I think it's really exciting about this medical school and what it could be doing for Austin and for the University of Texas. But I am a little concerned when you talk about the funding plans, and when I think about things such as Austin's, you know, one of the problems we have in the arts in Austin is the philanthropic community. Mm-hmm. So one question I have for you is, A, how is the philanthropic support for a medical school here in Austin? And B, the other thing that concerns me about pinning our economy on medical research is the big chunk of medical research that comes from the federal budget, mm-hmm. and what could be happening to that over the next X many years. So in terms of funding a medical school and counting on that for long-term vision, what do you say? Philanthropy, government, where is it going to come from?
Well, philanthropy is going to have to play a big role, and I'm glad you brought that up. Let's talk about a couple of issues related to philanthropy. The first is, well, I'll start with a process aspect. I laid out 10 things that we need to try to achieve in 10 years. And there's a reason I put 10 years on it. This is not something that, even as much progress as we've made and we've talked about, and as important as it is to get rolling now, it's not something that you do overnight. This is a big deal. And so we're going to need a period of time. But I also created an organizing committee. And this organizing committee is made up of a variety of people, including, for example, the president and provost of the University of Texas at Austin, and the chancellor and the executive vice chancellor of the system. It includes the chair and the current chair and the incoming chair of the healthcare district, a variety of folks. I don't want to try getting all the people. But one of the things that's important to your question is philanthropy is going to be such a necessary part of this that as part of the initial organizing committee, and I don't want it to be an afterthought. It has to be something we deal with today. I've put the president and CEO of the Austin Community Foundation, Jeff Garvey, on that organizing committee so that we never lose sight of that. I've also, by the way, spent, it's one of these deals, I'm learning so much. One of the things I like about what this project does is I get to learn some stuff. I've been visiting with a lot of experts in the area of philanthropy, and what they've also told me is that if you look nationally, that two of the areas you see the most giving in terms of philanthropy are health and education, and higher education specifically. So in essence, you have a synergy with what we're going to do there. I have already started receiving phone calls from people that want to be involved from a philanthropic perspective. Many people, frankly, it seems a little like it's pent-up demand, that this is something they want to see happen. Now, with regard to research, research is a component to this. And you're right, with what you're seeing, some of the federal activity and movement, you could have an impact. But we're talking beyond just, we're looking at research in a couple of ways. One is we're talking about basic research that would be part of any sort of medical school itself. In fact, when I say the words medical school, I don't just mean a building that has the words medical school on it. It would also have a basic research component. I'm also including in that things such as what you just saw in the announcement of the Seton UT Southwestern Research Institute. And we're talking about research and commercialization. In fact, 2 of the 10 involves a research component and a commercialization incubator. I've had great meetings. For example, IC Squared, folks at IC Squared will tell you that they have just completed a study, it was completed back in August, that says just for the amount of research that's going on right here, right now, in private research, we are way behind in terms of the number of wet labs we need. So part of what this, my 10 in 10 is how we get there so that private individuals and those who invest in private companies that do this will be in a position to do better research. The other thing I've learned, and you'll see as time goes by, is we have a lot of folks that are doing research and then they get to the point of needing to do the kinds of additional commercialization activity, and they're having to go elsewhere. They're right here in Austin, but they're going elsewhere. So there will be challenges, but we have so much going on right now that we can build on. And once and I truly believe, based upon my research and conversations, if we say we're going to build those kinds of research facilities, it will overnight change the number of companies that will be looking to do research and commercialization in Austin, Texas, regardless of some of the other things you might see happening at the government level. I hope that answered your question.
Hi, Senator Watson. Hello. Hi, my name is Julie Montgomery, and I was really enthusiastic about your honesty agenda this session, and so I was wondering if you could, well, it's a good plan, and so I was curious if you could maybe talk for a minute about your successes and what you might want to try next session.
Yeah. Anytime somebody, by the way, if you have a question to ask me to talk about my successes, that's a welcome question, just in case you were worried. I am a firm believer, and I will say it as loudly and as often as I can, that the state budget process is a broken, I won't even say some of the other words I think about it. It is a busted system. It is a system based upon 3 things: debt, diversions, and deception. And ultimately, it will not be sustainable because of that. And real quickly, I'll just say that with regard to debt, I'll give a little background here. With regard to debt, you pay for, it's okay to pay for big projects by financing them. I don't have, as a fundamental rule, I don't have a problem with that. But I do have a problem with it when you act like using a credit card is creating revenue and paying for something. And there will be a day during this biennium that we're living in right now, there will be an hour, a moment in time when the amount of money that you are paying for debt service payments on transportation projects exceeds the amount of cash we're putting into new transportation projects. Well, that ain't right. That ain't right. Diversions. You get taxed and get charged fees for a variety of piggy banks all over state government, where state government has promised you that they'll collect that tax and that fee and it will go to a specific or dedicated purpose. We call that general revenue dedicated funds. But that promise, those promises get broken. Back in 2001, $1.3 billion, 1.2 or $1.3 billion of money that was collected for specific dedicated purposes was used, not for those purposes, but to balance the budget. Well, that's a lot of money, $1.2, $1.3 billion. In this budget, $4.9 billion. What I would tell you is if the state can't balance its books without diverting promised dedicated funds, and it's growing from 1.2 or 3 to almost $5 billion. If the state is doing that, that's a structural deficit in and of itself, and it needs to be fixed. The third thing is deception. And I'll just use one example of that, the margins tax. When the margins tax was passed in 2006, the comptroller said it's not going to collect as much money as you need it to collect. It's going to create a structural problem in your budget. That was covered up in the 2007 session with a special fund that would cover that up. In the 2009 session, it was covered up with a federal bailout, the stimulus money. And in this session, it was covered up, because that money wasn't available, it was covered up in this session by just redefining what was owed local governments, about $4 billion. Just said, we're going to redefine it differently, and that's how we'll fix it. That's deceptive. In addition, the books balance. The books balance. But the only way those books really balance, if you listen to the experts, is by just ignoring over $4 billion of money that we're going to owe during this biennium for health care. When we come in 2013, there will be a deficit in this biennium's budget requiring some sort of supplemental appropriation. So I had an honesty agenda that said it's time to fix this, and we had some successes. One is the Legislative Budget Board, which is supposed to be there and responsible for dealing with the budget the 4/5 of the biennium that the legislature is not in session. The LBB, listen to this is a big success, at least must meet once a year. They didn't have to meet before. We also had success in a thing called the Cash Management Committee. The Cash Management Committee is supposed to meet to certify how much short-term debt the comptroller can issue. Well, it would meet over a year in advance of when she was going to issue that debt, set a cap, and walk away. There was no real analysis that went on. Now it must meet within a specific period of time before she can issue that debt. We also dealt with, we had success with regard to requiring that if there are changes in the budget, in other words, the big three get together and say, let's cut the budget from what we had last time, now that must be done in an open fashion as opposed to by emails or however it was done in the past. So we really had some success. Where my biggest failure, maybe not a biggest failure, I hate to define it as a biggest failure, but one of the things was dealing with this diversions. I had a bill that would have stopped that and couldn't get it voted on in Senate Finance. So a must-pass bill on the Senate floor, must-pass fiscal matters bill on the Senate floor, I offered an amendment. And what my amendment said was, it said that when the state of Texas collects 200% of what, in general revenue, specific dedicated funds, 200% of what it's actually going to appropriate for that promised purpose, it has to stop collecting that fee or tax. The chair of the Senate Finance Committee said on the Senate floor, he's right, we need to reform the tax system. I moved to table. And it went down on a straight partisan vote. But a number of people have come to me and said, you were right. We're going to have to look at that next session. So I think it's one of those deals where the honesty agenda, we had great success, and we'll have even more success down the road. It'll be interesting to see whether my name's on any of it or somebody else picks it up. But I don't care. I just want it to pass.
Think there's any hope of the issue of the margins tax being engaged in the interim?
It's going to have to be. Well, you'd say during the interim. But we'll see. You know, the lawsuit is it's ripe and it's there and it's being discussed, and so if something happens on that during the interim, then there'll be probably no question, because it'll have to, it could, depending on how they rule, it could have a real impact. But the margins tax is a failed system. It's a failed tax. And as a result of that, you're seeing people that before were either not saying it was broken or just not talking about it, now saying we got to do something about it. People that, that really were very quiet before. The word is, of course, this is something that probably has to originate in the House, because those, the Constitution requires that tax bills originate in the House of Representatives. So I think one of the telling things is if you start seeing the House Ways and Means Committee start holding hearings or doing things during this interim that are somewhat out of the ordinary, that also will be a big signal. But I really think that we cannot sustain the state of Texas with failed systems. And I think that if we don't do it during the interim, and it'll be, this interim depends on what happens on a presidential election and how all that plays out. It also depends on what happens in a Senate primary, and so there's a lot of things there. You're probably looking more at the regular session. Speaker
Strauss did send signals that they were talking about maybe thinking about it.
Yeah. Well,
that's more than that's more than we've seen before.
Well, yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And unfortunately, you don't see big actions unless there's a crisis. And man, we're at a crisis point. The lawsuits related to the school system, the lawsuits related to the margins tax, the fact that we just know that the margins tax has a structural problem, the fact that we just know that we've got about $5 billion of diversions, we've got a real problem in our budget. We might be able to make those books balance. And when the Medicaid payments all start rolling in, or bills start rolling in, that adds another $4 billion to it. Sooner or later you got a problem. And even those who don't want to recognize it, it's staring them in the face.
People got out of town at the end of June, but they knew it was there.
Part of the reason that's exactly right. Part of the reason and I think this was the wrong way to do it, but part of the reason that you saw some people, good, smart people, saying they didn't want to spend any of the rainy day fund is because they knew that while we weren't spending it, it was already committed. And even though the books balanced, they knew that money is over there so that it'll be available when the bills do start coming in to pay for it. So there's a difference between spending and committing, but in this case, they're awfully close.
And to be fair to Speaker Strauss, he did sit in that chair when he was here in the spring and say they weren't going to look at the margins tax during the session, but they would probably need to think about it during the interim, and then he did follow up on that.
Yeah.
With that, I want to thank you not only for coming today, for all the things you do for the University of Texas and for higher education in the state. We appreciate it, and as somebody who's lived in Austin a long time, great to have you here and love the things you've done for the city. So please, Senator Kirk Watson.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.